Well, we did the high points. We gotta do the low. So at the end of a video that I did last week going over the best episodes written by former Doctor Who showrunner Russell T Davies, I said that I was going to come back and do the 10 worst episodes he wrote, and here we are. Now, a bit like when I talked about his best episodes, I do have to preface this slightly and explain. The man only wrote 23 episodes, and again, I'm only tackling episodes that he wrote himself only. I'm not including any episodes that he wrote with a co-writer. So that's only 23 episodes, which means I barely got enough to fill out a top and a bottom 10. So that means some of the ones on the lower half of this bottom 10 list are actually not all that bad, but this is still where they're going to end up. And I guarantee that some people's favorite episodes are going to be on this list. So I might as well just suck it up, accept the fact that I'm going to have a lot of people screaming at me in the contents, and let's get to it. With number 10, Gridlock, which hurt me to put on here because I actually like Gridlock, except that when I sort of take a step back and remove it from my nostalgia and the fact that it was one of the early episodes that I saw, and look at the fact that it's a little goofy. I mean, the starting premise is actually kind of awesome in terms of taking an everyday thing and blowing it up to sci-fi proportions. Traffic jams are something we've all dealt with. Imagine the universe's worst traffic jam where generations go by before a family can get to an off-ramp. That's kind of awesome. But then there's a lot of the fine details that bring it down. First of all, we've got the cat people back again. We'll be revisiting them on this list. And while they're not as bad here as they are in New Earth, again, we'll come back to that, it's still a really goofy concept. The Makra, I kind of like the nod, but honestly, this episode doesn't need monsters. There's no reason for them to be there other than to insert and force, a couple of whiz-bang action-y tension kind of moments. And I don't think this show needed that. I think the actual injection of sort of lighthearted swashbuckling is a knock against the concept. I think if they really wanted to roll with just the feeling of a traffic jam, just the oppressiveness of it would have been much better to play that up over giving us a monster. We didn't need a monster. And another idea and again, it factors into the explanation for why this happened, but the whole mood drug thing, that is such a good idea. I feel like it deserved its own episode, and it feels like a bit of a waste that it ended up being thrown away as basically a background explanatory element in this episode. So, yeah, because of those things, I do have to put Gridlock on this list. I still like it, but yeah, when I'm looking at the man's work, yeah, it's a bottom 10 episode. Moving along to number 9, The Runaway Bride. Another one that I really, really wish I didn't have to put on here because I love Donna. I say this at pretty much every opportunity. Donna's my favorite companion. Donna's the best. But she's grating in this one. And she kind of has to be for her arc to work as a companion, but taking it in isolation, this first episode, yeah, it's painful, and she's obnoxious, and she's irritating, and we get the return of the Santa robots, which again, that's something I'm going to come back to later in the list. And the Rachnos is a really cool design, but the performance doesn't really work. I think my big problem with the Rachnos Queen is that as cool as she looks, first of all, her performance is very over the top, which happened. She was probably trying to compensate for the makeup and the look and try and bring a performance through that. But I really wish they had allowed her to go into a booth afterwards and dub over her dialogue, because you can really hear her struggling to get words past those teeth they fit her with. And she talks like this, "My children, I will decline." You can just hear how much this teeth prosthetic is inhibiting her speech, and it drove me nuts. Again, there are some really good moments in this, like especially the doctor, sort of going overboard and drowning the Rachnos and her offspring and everything, and Donna taking that moment, "Doctor, you can stop now." I mean, doubly so given the way that comes back in Left Turn, but again, if I'm going to look at this episode in isolation, it's just kind of goofy, and it's got enough things that I'm like, I know that pays off later, but right now, looking at it here, yeah, it's annoying. Yeah, it bugged me. Number 8, The Christmas Invasion. See, told you Santa robots were coming back, because just the Santa robots are dumb. At this point, I feel like with the Christmas specials in general, that if the episode is not going to really excessively lean into the Christmas thing, like with something like Last Christmas or Christmas Carol, then I kind of want the Christmas aspect to be relegated to the background at best. This sort of forcible insertion of a lot of Christmas things like the killer tree and the Santa robots, it's painful, and it's the kind of thing that thankfully I feel overall the show has moved away from, but that stuff's grating. Now, this episode does get good. It gets great, in fact, once David Tennant steps out of the TARDIS in the last, 15 minutes of the episode. Up to that point, it's okay. It's fine. I mean, Rose, I don't dislike Rose as a companion, but most of what works about her is her chemistry and the way she interacts with, at first, Eccleston and then Tennant. On her own, she doesn't work for me. I don't find her particularly compelling when she's not playing off the Doctor. So the fact that we're stuck with her and her mother, who I'm not a huge fan of, for so long, it's just, it doesn't help. And finally, I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm kind of not really okay with what happens to Harriet Jones. I think that her actions were completely reasonable, and I think the Doctor overstepped. And not that, I guess the reason it doesn't sit with me is the Doctor never admits maybe I went too far with that. Because, I mean, from what we know, he effectively robbed the universe of a golden age of her leadership, and he never makes any apologies for it. And I get that, it lends to his hubris, which is stuff that pays off towards the end of Tennant's run. So I get all that. It just still bothers me. I feel like the character deserved better, and I don't like how unremarked upon it feels. The fact that he did her wrong, as far as I'm concerned. But again, when Tennant's on screen, it's great. Just that needed to be more of the episode. Number 7, Tooth and Claw. Again, some good aspects. I like that David Tennant got to use his actual accent for a little bit of it. Some fun interactions with him and Rose and all of that. But, I mean, all right, first of all, the ninja monks, in a campy way, it's kind of a fun image, but it doesn't really lend to anything. And the werewolf, this is where the show's budgetary restrictions really showed. And I think in general, Doctor Who needs to avoid 100% CGI created creatures, because they never look very good. And the werewolf didn't look great at the time it aired, and it has not aged well at all. It's the only reason it's not as bad as, say, the Lazarus monster is because, it's a werewolf. We have a basis for a werewolf. That Lazarus monster was just, what the hell? But it doesn't look very good. But again, there are good moments, and I like David Tennant's reaction to it. But ultimately, that's kind of it. I like Tennant in it, and Rose is fine in it, but the actual story doesn't really grab me, doesn't feel especially well executed. It's not particularly surprising. It's just kind of meh. And then you throw a very poorly aging CGI effects heavy bit on top of that, and it's one that I'm not too keen to revisit. Music was good though. Number 6, Voyage of the Damned. And I feel like this is the drum I'm gonna keep beating this entire video, but good elements, good parts. I like how expansive the cast is. I like that the ones who survived were not the ones that the Doctor necessarily would have chosen. I like that one of the characters points out, well, if you could choose who lives and who dies, then you'd be a monster. I like that moment. I like Wilf. I love Wilf. Astrid works pretty well as a one-off companion. But this thing kind of nosedives right off the bat, because we come into this off of a cliffhanger of the Titanic. The Titanic crashes into the TARDIS, and it's not the Titanic. It's a ship. It's a spaceship that looks like the Titanic. So that's a big cop-out for that lead-in cliffhanger in the first place. And then, while I do like how expansive the cast is, exactly how nuanced or how, involved I'm able to get with these characters, it varies. Some of them I can sort of grab into. Like I said, Astrid's quite good. The guy who's the tour guide I like quite a bit, but most of the other characters are pretty generic, bordering on cartoonishly broad, in fact. And then there's things like the host, kill. Like, that is a tad too goofy. That feels very much like a series 1 or 2 idea. This far into the show, it felt like that was the kind of idea the show had moved on from at that point. So it felt needlessly campy, needlessly goofy. And then there's Max Capricorn, who I talked about years ago on my worst one-off villains list, because I used the word cartoonish before. That there is no other word for that man. I swear to God, he is a rejected Captain Planet villain. That guy, I can't. Again, good moments. Alonzo, hey, but there's too much that's just... Number 5, Boomtown. Hey, it's the Slitheen. You knew they were gonna show up on here. So there's basically one scene that I borderline love in this episode, and that is the dinner scene between the Doctor and that one remaining Slitheen. I love that scene. I like their interactions. I like the way they wind each other up. I like that it feels almost like a Hannibal Lecter Clarice Starling scene, and it's terrific. But the rest of it is just... I want to say it's kind of there, except it's kind of not. There's almost nothing else I even remember from that episode. I remember they toned down the farting, thank God. But, you know, the whole opening up the TARDIS and she becomes an egg, and I get they had to set up the opening up the TARDIS because of what happens in the parting of ways, but, like, that's weird and random, and her scheme is just kind of a thing that she's doing, and I couldn't even really tell you why at this point. It's just, there's very little of substance. What this feels like overall is this feels like a filler episode. This feels like, okay, we're not ready for the finale yet. We need another episode in here. Let's revisit, you know, there was a straggling Slitheen, and there's our episode. Well, what's she doing? What's the plot? What's the actual thrust of the episode? I don't know. Or just do something. That's what it feels like. But we're not done with the Slitheen, because number 4 is Aliens in London and World War III, which I suppose serves as the reminder I do 2-parters and only count them as one story. So again, there are moments, specific moments that I love. I love that when that little pig thing gets shot and the Doctor scolds the soldier, it was scared. And I love when the Doctor says information and they just start shouting everything that they can remember about the Slitheen at him. He's just standing there going, narrows it down, narrows it down. I love that stuff. That's actually some of my favorite stuff during Eccleston's run. But then there's the farting aliens who do this slow unzip, and I get it the first time for the reveal, but like every time it's like, why are people just standing there staring at you as you do the slow unzip on your head, and the farting and the farting and the farting? And I get that it's like it's meant to be a parody and it's belittling to government, but it's is there a less nuanced way to dress somebody down than with a friggin' fart joke? I don't like how shoehorned the whole turning Mickey into this hacker thing because of this one password that unlocks everything that the Doctor happened to know. What? That's just cheap, lazy writing and an attempt to force Mickey to be helpful when he just wasn't at this point. And there's another moment that I kind of hate, and it comes off of what should be a triumphant moment for the Doctor, because he's backed against the wall. It's like, never back me against the lift, and the elevator doors open, and he steps back, and he gets away. None of the people who are right there just stick a hand out to stop the door from closing and stop the lift from leaving. What? They just stand there as he because it has to open all the way, he has to step in, then it has to go. Even if I accept the idea that an elevator door closes immediately after someone steps into it, which never happens, they still open and close at this pace. Nobody stopped it. Nobody just stuck a hand in between the... What? Really? Really? Again, and that just lends itself to lazy writing and a lazy way to get out of the situation. It's just, like I said, there's a handful of moments basically having to do with the Doctor himself that are good, quite good, and Harriet Jones is good, but man, the stuff that's not good in these episodes there is really not good. Number 3, The Long Game. So there's pretty much one thing that this episode does right, as far as I'm concerned, and it is named Simon Pegg. I am a sucker for Simon Pegg. I give the man a lot of leeway, and as far as I'm concerned, he elevated the episode, and he functioned much better as a villain than the friggin' Jagrafess, but he's kind of it. It was weird sort of going back and looking at it again, because this is the only episode I can think of where Eccleston's heart doesn't feel like it's in his line reading. Like, he's got this line, you know, take these manacles off me and I'll show you how much fun I am, or whatever it is that he says. And like, it's so half-hearted, which is something I never got from him in any other episode. It feels like the one time that the aggravation of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes at the time sort of seeped into his performance, and it's the only time I get that. So he's not quite working for me in this episode. We're stuck with Adam Mitchell, who I get as a concept in terms of here's a real crap companion to explain why Rose is so good and how her rolling with the Doctor is not something everyone can do. I get that, but he's still annoying to deal with. You've got the Jagrafest, which it's a mouth in the ceiling, and I talked about him on my worst villains list because it's the epitome of insert monster here. It's just so bland and generic, and like I said, the editor is a way more compelling villain. We didn't need that. And overall, the episode is just slow and boring. Doctor Who is not often boring, at least not for me, but this one kind of is. Number 2, New Earth. Oh, Series 2, you had a rough start, didn't you? So, where do we begin? First of all, I feel like in some ways Tennant didn't quite have his feet under him yet. He's fine, he's not bad in this, but he isn't quite nailing it on all fronts the way that he is in some of his later episodes, and the way in which he can elevate a sometimes not so great episode like he did with the Christmas Invasion. I feel like he really knew how to play the Doctor coming right out of Regeneration, but this first adventure where he's supposed to kind of settled into a thing, he doesn't seem like he's quite there yet. And again, it's not a bad performance, but he doesn't quite feel comfortable in the role quite yet. And then we got the cat people, and look, the design is fine, the makeup's fine as far as these things go, but for all the amazing, fantastical things, it just bothers me when sci-fi shows like this just take an Earth animal and slap its face onto a human actor. That is just such a lazy way to design a alien race. It's the same reason I can't stand the Hath, because it's just a fish head. It's like, that's not an alien, that's something I know just stretched into a person. Give me something I've never seen before. Give me something that doesn't make immediate logical sense, where I can go, oh, well, that's a fly in a boiler suit. That's a fish with a water mouth breather. That's a cat as a nurse. And then there's Cassandra, which I think was a really weird choice to do a recurring villain out of. Because first of all, considering how her death was pretty definitive, and the toss-off joke line explaining her coming back is kind of weak. I do, and I've mentioned this before, I do like the kind of coda they give for her character at the very end with it looping back. And her and that other guy's body, that's fine, but the whole body swapping thing also doesn't really serve much of a purpose as far as plot or anything else goes. But it also results in this tonal whiplash, because you get the standard goofy humor you expect out of a body swapping thing, but then you've got these people being bred to be diseased and live this horrific life, and they get released to infect people with the multitudes of diseases, and this is a mix of elements that don't gel. They just kind of clash against each other, and nothing is really working, nothing is interlacing, and even the ideas that are here aren't particularly good ones. But it is not, in my opinion, the #1 worst episode that Russell T Davies ever wrote. So that brings us to #1. Now, I gotta be honest, this list was actually really hard to order. Except for figuring out #1. #1 was an easy choice. And I know this episode has its fans, but I think even those fans knew that this was coming. #1, Love and Monsters. Oh boy. I've said it before, I get the idea. I get the concept of this episode in terms of, not only being a Doctor Light episode, but it being sort of a commentary on fandom and how fandom can start out one way and be twisted into something that is more destructive. I get that. It still doesn't work. First of all, if you're going to do a Dr. Light episode, you have to be sure that whatever characters you are focusing on instead of the Doctor are as compelling as the Doctor is to make up for that gap. That's why Turn Left works, because we've got Donna, and we've had Donna for a while, and we've gotten to know and to like Donna. That is why Blink works, because Sally Sparrow is a well-written character who we get to know. Elton and the entire rest of these fans are not compelling characters. They're not engaging, so they don't pick up the slack in the fact that we don't have the Doctor. That's the first thing. Then there's the Absorb-a-Loft. And again, I get that they were kind of stuck in terms of the general design and the concept of this thing because a kid won a contest, and it's a very, it's the kind of design a kid would come up with. But you know, they could have tried. I feel like they just slapped this guy in the suit, and the fact that he runs around going, it's like, you're not even trying. And then there's the weird, highly inappropriate joke at the end of the thing. There's the fact that, while I understand that it's trying to be a commentary on fandom, it doesn't feel like it's laughing with the fans. It feels like it's laughing at the fans. It's paced weird. The characters aren't interesting. There's no sense of stakes because the characters aren't interesting. Now the characters we care about are in jeopardy. There's like a couple of kernels on the conceptual level that, okay, maybe there's something there, but aside from that, nothing here works. And that is why I've got to say Love and Monsters was the worst episode that Russell T Davies ever wrote. So there you go. That's my list. I have no doubt that people, if you have not already slagged me off in the comments, are prepared to do so. And I'm sure some of you disagree. But if you could, you know, not be overly rude about it, feel free to disagree with me or to agree with me or whatever your thoughts are. Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast. Or I am also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast. Both of those are available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.